Hi Stitchers! I was looking through my chart stash a few days ago and I came across a series of 4 designs that I really love. I've had them for a couple of years, quite a few years now. I love the patterns, but every time I look at them I'm terrified by them and they completely freak me out, and I put them back in my chart box again, which is a really silly thing to do as they're only patterns and they can't hurt me. But I think we've all got those sort of patterns or kits in our stash that we really love them, but there's just something about them, perhaps a new technique they use, a different type of thread, maybe they're stitched on black fabric or they've got loads of French knots, and for some reason we convince ourselves that we can't possibly do it, and so we put them back in our stash again. And it made me think about other designs where I've had that sort of fear, but I've stitched the designs and I was so glad I did, and I realised that you can stitch anything you want to if you put your mind to it, which was a good reminder for me. And I know that everybody's different, all stitches are different. I'm the type of person in certain areas of my life where I like to stretch myself a bit, and that applies to stitching and to cooking really. Those are the 2 things I'm quite passionate about, 2 things that I've done from a very young age, so maybe that's the reason why. But I know that there's other stitchers out there who just want to cross stitch. They're not interested in learning new stitches, the thought of that stresses them out, and that is absolutely fine. I am a great believer that it doesn't matter what you stitch on, as long as you love stitching it, because all stitching, regardless of what fabric, threads, pattern you stitch, it all takes time, it all takes talent, and it all takes love. So that's why we choose to stitch really. But I thought what I would do today is share with you 6 finishes that I've had that really sort of plot my little stitching journey really over the past 4 years, and really show why I stitch the type of things I do currently. So I know some of you probably have had similar milestones in your stitching history. Maybe some of the things that I mention are things that you're looking to sort of get into now. So it'd be really interesting to hear like your own stitching milestones, how far your stitching has come from when you first started. So, if you want to share those sort of things with me, then please leave a comment. I don't mind how long your comments are. I love reading all of them and hearing about your own experiences, or perhaps if you want to do a similar video sort of plotting your stitching history. I find that really interesting, how the patterns you start off stitching aren't necessarily the ones that you end up sort of stitching several years later, because our tastes, well, my tastes constantly change. So anyway, that's the topic of this video, my stitching journey, which sounds a bit melodramatic really. It's not meant to, but I just couldn't think what else to call it. So everybody's got to start somewhere. For my starting point, I've chosen to start from 4 years ago. I mentioned in my first stitching video, my introduction, that I really started taking up stitching again as a sort of serious hobby 4 years ago when I was quite ill. Up until that point I'd only really stitched every whit and while really, when I felt I needed some sort of creative outlet. So what I would do is buy a kit and stitch it, and then that was that. I got it out of my system until the next time, a few years later, that I felt the need to do it. But I did mention in my first video that the first bit of stitching that I did 4 years ago was a Margaret Sherry design, and I dug through my archives and I found it. So this was what I was stitching 4 years ago. So here it is. I don't know if you can see that. It's by a very well-known and very popular designer here in the UK, and that's Margaret Sherry. She does lots of series of cats. They're incredibly popular, and any magazine that sort of features them, you can guarantee afterwards will go for quite a high price on eBay. So that was where I started. I bought a Crossstitcher magazine. This one was on the cover and I loved it, so I stitched it. So it's stitched on 14 count Ada with probably anchor threads. I would have raided my sister's cross-stitch stash for them, because at the time I didn't have any stash, so I probably would have got the Ada from eBay or somewhere like that. And yeah, so I stitched that one up. And so that's where I started, just, fairly easy, simple design. And that's what got me back into cross-stitching really. So 4 years ago, that was what I was stitching. And I was quite happy getting the magazines, Crossstitcher magazine, picking charts out of it that I loved, and then I would just gather the materials that I needed. So I started to build up quite a bit of anchor thread and that's probably why I've ended up with both DMC and Anchor almost complete sets, because I started off with Anchor. Not for any other reason, and I think my sister had more of those at the time, so I just used the Anchor thread list rather than the DMC thread list. So yeah, I stitched a few things from Crossstitcher. I think in the same series of these culinary cats that Margaret Sherry did, I stitched a little cat on an apron for my sister using that DMC soluble canvas. So yeah, I had, you know, fun just picking designs that I loved out of magazines. And then I noticed on one design that it said, you know, you can stitch this on 18 count Ada, or you can stitch it on 28 count evenweave. And I thought, oh, evenweave, that's different, I've not used that before, what's all that about? And the other thing that caught my eye with this design was that it also used beads, and I thought, oh, that's something new, something different, perhaps I'll have a go at stitching that one. And that's what I did. So my second stitching milestone, which is probably one that the majority of us have had, or perhaps are coming up to, is to stitch on evenweave. And I was so glad I did, really glad. I mean, it completely changed the way that I stitch. And when you start stitching on evenweave, it also opens up a whole new sort of greater fabric selection for you, because there's so many sort of different types of fabric in evenweave and linen that you can stitch on. So I was really glad I did that. So this is a project that I chose. Again, it was from Crossstitcher magazine. I think it's called Tribal Lady or something like that. So I went on eBay and I bought some lemon coloured evenweave, and I got all the little beads to go with it. So this was the very first piece that I ever used beads on, and that I stitched on evenweave. It wasn't long after the Culinary Cats piece, to be honest. So I went from stitching from Ada to evenweave quite quickly. Now I know this can be, you know, somewhat of a hot topic for stitchers, whether to stitch on, you know, Ada or evenweave. You know, stitch on what you like, but I would definitely say, if you haven't given evenweave a try, to have a go. There are very few stitchers, I would say, that try evenweave and hate it. Most stitchers will try evenweave and will probably think, oh, I can't believe it took me so long to do this, because I love it. So I would definitely say, perhaps if you're one of those stitchers that are a bit nervous about stitching on evenweave, perhaps, you know, an evenweave kit or a pattern is in your stash, and that's the pattern that you keep looking at and putting down again because you're just a tiny bit nervous about stitching on evenweave. And my advice to you would be, don't be nervous. It's really easy, which I know is easy for me to say because I've been stitching on it for years, but you'll be surprised at how easy it is. Now I know Stitching May, in her most recent video, I think, she mentioned about stitching on evenweave, the confusion that sometimes arises on which hole to come up with on your fabric. Do you start your stitch at a horizontal weave on your fabric or thread on your fabric, or do you start it next to a vertical weave on your fabric? I'm going to say something slightly controversial, but I do know there are a lot of stitchers out there that agree with me on this point, and that is that, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. I know when I first started stitching on evenweave, all I did, I thought, oh, this is a new fabric, how do I stitch on it? And all I did was turn to the back of the magazine, and it told me there how to stitch over 2. And actually the same with the beading. I didn't know how to bead, so I looked at the back of the magazine and it told me how to bead. No big deal. And I think sometimes the more you read about something, the worse it gets. If you read on forums or on blogs or, you know, wherever, a lot of people saying, oh, I'm really nervous about stitching over 2, then even though you might not start off feeling that way, the more you read that other people are nervous, the more you think, oh my goodness, maybe there's something more to this than meets the eye. And then it starts affecting how you feel about something. So sometimes, you know, less is more, really. But back to my original point about why it doesn't matter. Basically, the reason why traditional stitchers tell you that you should start to the left of where a vertical fabric thread crosses a horizontal fabric thread is basically to make sure that your floss that you're using doesn't slip through the weave of the fabric. To be honest, that's not really an issue when you stitch over 2, it's more of an issue when you stitch over 1. When you stitch over 1, of course you don't get a choice where to start your stitch, in the sense that you need to use every single hole. So you can't stitch your stitches just next to a vertical thread, a vertical thread on your fabric. So as I stitch over one, you know, that's something I don't have to worry about, because I've got to use every single hole in the fabric. So when it comes to stitching over two, it really doesn't matter. The chances of your, you know, floss slipping through the weave of your fabric is, you know, pretty slim. But I will say it is very useful to remember what thread of fabric your needle comes up, where you put your first stitch, whether it's next to a vertical thread or horizontal thread, to remember that, because then as you go along stitching, you'll know instantly if you've miscounted, because obviously at its most basic level you're stitching into every other hole of your fabric. So if you start at next to a vertical thread, you stitch along, and then you suddenly pull your needle up and you're next to a horizontal thread, then you know somewhere along the line you've miscounted. Either you've gone over an extra thread or not enough. So you've gone over one thread or 3 threads instead of 2 threads. So that's why it's always good to remember and to get into that habit. So as it happens, I'm always in the habit of starting next to a vertical thread, just for that reason, just so I know I haven't miscounted. Now the other reason I can say that it doesn't matter whether you start next to a vertical or a horizontal thread is because I've done it both ways. And I promise you that your stitching will not unravel before your very eyes if you start next to a horizontal thread, and here's the proof. And the reason why I know that I started these one next to a horizontal thread and one next to a vertical thread is because when I was stitching the one that I started next to a horizontal thread, I suddenly realised that I was starting next to a horizontal thread, and I thought, oh no, I've miscounted, I'm going to have to go back and rip out all these stitches. But when I went back to my original stitch, I found out that what I'd actually done is start at a horizontal, next to a horizontal thread of the fabric. So it was kind of my mistake, because I usually always start next to a vertical thread. So that's how I know it doesn't make any difference. So just to prove it, this one is started next to a vertical thread, as all the traditionists will tell you to do. Incidentally, although I'm just showing you this just to make a point, this design is by the Samper girl, another one of my favourite designers. A lot of you, if you're knitters perhaps, the Samper girl, Tanya Marie Anderson, she's on Ravelry and Instagram, and she does knitting podcasts as well, so you might know her that way. But yeah, so there's this one, I can't remember what it's called now. I want to say it's called At Home with Jane. But there you go. This one was stitched, as all the traditionists will tell you, next to next to a vertical thread on your fabric, as they tell you to start on evenweave. So that one was done correctly. Well, correctly according to the experts. And this one was started incorrectly, as a traditionist will tell you. I started it next to a horizontal weave of the fabric, so the way they tell you not to. And to my eye, you wouldn't know. They look the same, you know, the stitches aren't any less even or unravelling or anything like that. So that's my evidence to support my argument. You may feel differently, and of course everybody's welcome to their own opinion, but I just wanted to say that for any of you out there that haven't started stitching on evenweave yet, you know, at the end of the day it doesn't really matter where you start, you know, that first stitch on evenweave, as long as you try and remember and be consistent in where you know, whether you choose to start at a horizontal or a vertical. If you're always consistent in that, then you'll know instantly if you've miscounted. So I just thought I'd mention that little point, and hope I haven't offended anybody by sharing my opinion, but there you go. So yeah, I was quite happy stitching away on evenweave. That then sort of became my fabric of choice once I'd you know, got the hang of it. And to be honest, you know, after a few stitches you sort of get an eye for it, because obviously the stitches on 28 count evenweave are the same size as they are on 14 count Ada, so you do kind of know if you've accidentally gone over a thread because the shape of your stitch doesn't look right. So it's, you know, usually quite easy to pick that up. So I was quite happy stitching away on evenweave, and basically what I was doing was buying Crossstitcher magazines, and each month I'd pick out the patterns that I liked, and then I would kit it up with the anchor threads and the fabric that I needed. But I kind of got to the point where I was thinking there, you know, must be more to this than meets the eye. You know, I was sort of getting a bit fed up with the patterns that were in the cross-stitch magazines, and I know I don't want to start ranting because I don't want to offend anybody. These are just my opinions, but I know quite a few other stitchers feel the same way as me, and I guess it depends where you kind of are in your stitching journey. But I do kind of have a bit of a bugbear with UK cross-stitch magazines. A lot of the the patterns are fine, you know, but they don't. I was looking for something to stretch me, and they weren't doing that. And now when I look back and I think of the time, I didn't waste time stitching from those magazines, but there's just so much more to learn and know about cross stitch and threads and fabrics than those magazines tell you. And sometimes I think about the stitchers that perhaps all they know about cross stitching is what they get from those magazines, and they are missing out on so much. So I was at this sort of point where I was looking for something more, and the only time that UK sort of cross stitching magazines ever use any different types of thread is if they use a pattern that charts a pattern that uses DMC metallic. Well, you already know my feelings on that subject, and you know, just imagine if you're a cross stitcher and all you've ever known, all you ever think there is out there is DMC metallic because you've, you know, seen it in a cross stitch magazine, when actually that, you know, that might put you off stitching the metallics forever. But there's much better options out there. And also, and sometimes they do use Krennic, you know, Joan Elliott designs, they always use Krennic and beads, you know, there's the odd pattern with beads in, but it just wasn't enough for me. And as I've said before, 2011 was the year that I sort of discovered stitching on the internet, and it made, oh, such a difference, because through that I discovered So-and-So, the website familiar to all UK cross stitchers that, you know, want something a bit different to stitch with. And once I found that, that was it really. I sort of stopped buying cross stitch magazines. I still buy them occasionally if there is, usually if there's a Joan Elliott chart in one of them, I will buy them. But on the whole, I'm not really a great fan of them, and I've got plenty to be getting on with anyway. Obviously they're great. I'm not saying, you know, they're bad. Obviously lots of you stitch from them and some of the charts in them are fine, but for me personally, I wanted more from my stitching. So as I said, I discovered So-and-So, and then I realised that there were other brands of floss out there other than Anchor, DMC and Madeira, which I always find is odd that cross-stitch magazines in the UK use, you know, give you a floss list for Madeira thread, because I don't actually know that many stitchers that use it. But anyway, on to more positive things. Yeah, so I discovered So-and-So and realised all the designers out there, the charts that they had, and I was amazed, and I just thought, right, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be stitching. So in 2011, I picked out 2 charts that I like the look of, and I also bought the speciality threads to go with them, which was, you know, I was really excited by this. So the 2 designs I chose were 2 waxing moon designs. A lot of stitchers stitch their designs. They're really fun to stitch. And I also chose to stitch them on linen, which was a fabric that I'd not used up until that point. I've been happily stitching away on evenweave, but I'd not used linen, so I thought, oh, another opportunity to try something new. So here are the 2 designs. This one is called Everyone Brings Joy, and all of that is stitched with Gentle Art sampler threads. They were the very first speciality threads I ever used, and I kind of have a little soft spot for them now, really. So I do like to use them where I can. And the next one that I chose to stitch, another waxing moon design. Oops. This one's called Welcome to the Nuthouse, and again, all stitched in Gentle Art sampler thread, and each of them have a little button by just another button company. There's a little acorn on that one, and a little heart on that one. So, you know, I loved stitching both of those designs, and to me that was my 3rd stitching milestone. Not just stitching on linen, but using speciality threads. And now when I think back, those 10 threads, Gentle Art sampler threads, that I bought specifically for those charts in the last 3 years have increased 100-fold since then. And that's one of the things I love about stitching, the fact that there are so many different brands of thread that you can use in so many different colours, and that's one of the things that makes stitching really exciting for me. So I was so glad that I discovered there were other threads out there. Absolutely nothing wrong with stitching in DMC and Anchor, you know, we all stitch using those threads, but for me personally that was something that, you know, that I needed to know really, that there were other threads out there, which isn't to say that if the only threads that you use in your stitching are, you know, DMC and Anchor, your stitching is no less, you know, because of it. It's just that I like to use different things, and that's just the type of person I am. So I was so glad to find out that, and it really did totally change the way that I stitch. So that's my third stitching milestone. Now the fourth one is probably actually one of the most important ones for me, and this particular piece that I completed really sums up everything I love about stitching. So now in my little stitching journey we're up to sort of about the summer of 2011, and I decided then, I'd seen chatelaine designs and I decided that I'd love to stitch one. But, you know, I was slightly nervous, as we all are when we look at them, and I thought, I have never stitched a speciality stitch in my life. I've done the odd French knot here and there, but I didn't really think that counted. And I don't know if any of you out there are followers of blogs, but I love following stitching blogs. And at the time, there was this chart that seemed to be on every single blog, and I was like, what is this chart? I need to stitch it. I just love the idea of it. And it was a chart which I know some of you are familiar with because I saw it in Stitching May's chart folder when she was flipping through it the other day when she was showing her chart storage video. And it's called The Tree of Stitches, and it was a stitch along as part of the Yahoo Stitch Specialists group. And I joined the group, and the owner of the group is actually a needlework designer, and at the time every year, it was a fairly new group then. I think Tree of Stitches was one of the first designs that she released as a stitch along, and she continued every year up until, you know, including this year, to have stitch alongs of her designs. Now at the time, Tree of Stitches was a free design for all members of the Stitch Along Yahoo, the Stitch Specialists Yahoo group. Now she still does stitch alongs, but I think for the current one, the Mojo sampler, I think she charged £3 for that one. But it's, you know, for the amount of information and everything you get, £3 is nothing for a chart. Anyway, I could rave about this chart for ages because it just really totally changed the way I stitch. So Tree of Stitches is the chart name. Before I waffle on about it, here it is. Now you might recognise it. Sorry about the glare. I don't know if you can see, but each one of those sections on that tree is a different speciality stitch. Now the other thing that made this chart a little bit scary for me was not just doing all these new stitches, but it was the fact that you got to choose your own colours, and that was a big deal for me because I'm kind of the person that likes to generally in life follow the rules, and I just thought, oh my goodness, what if I pick these colours and they look rubbish and they don't go, and you know, I was fretting about that a bit because that's, you know, it's like a big thing. It was a big thing for me to choose my own colours, but after I did it, I loved it. Which kind of explains why now I'm forever changing colours. You know, I use completely different materials that are often charted for things, and it's all down to this chart, stitching this design. I freaked out about choosing my own colours, and I freaked out about doing the speciality stitches, but I stitched it and I love it, and it now hangs in my hallway, and every time I look at it, it reminds me that you can do whatever you want to do, really. You should have the confidence to know your own abilities and just go for it, really. Because if I'd been too scared to do this design, I would never have known how much I love doing speciality stitches, how much I love choosing my own colours, and this piece really sums up everything I love about stitching. It's even got beads in it, and it's got a bit of metallic in it, but you probably can't see it very well. the metallic is in this colour of stitches. I used it with, all of this is stitched in Gentle Art sampler thread, because at the time those were the only special threads that I had. Yeah, so this piece is like particularly special for me, and for that reason it sits in my top 3 stitches of all time, because I just love it. Some of the stitches used in it, obviously you've got cross stitch, French knots, Smyrna stitches, rice stitches, eyelets, different shapes of road stitches. You've got octagonal roads, square row stitches, cushion stitch, star stitch, Norwich stitch, Jerusalem stitch, tied windmill stitch, and knit stitch as well, which I think is quite funny. I can't knit, but I can do knit stitch. That's what the owl is done in. His body is done in knit stitch, but I don't think you can see it very well. But yeah, that's the only way you're ever going to get me to knit, is to do knit stitch. Yeah, so this pattern you can still buy. You can buy on Abby Gurdon's needlework page, which I will of course link to. It was amazing stitching this, because each week we'd get a different part. It would be a different stitch, so you'd get the stitch diagram, all the information about the stitch, and then obviously you get the part of the chart that it was used on. So I think that, I can't remember how much the chart is. It probably will seem quite expensive, but bear in mind there's instructions in there for about, I don't know, 16 or 17 speciality stitches, and also various other really useful bits of information. So if that design appeals to you, I would definitely check out that website for that chart. I just can't tell you how much I love stitching it, and what a difference it made to my stitching, because it made me realise the things that I love about stitching. You know, I love all the elements in this chart, and if I'd never stitched it I wouldn't know that, and I might well have given up on stitching if all I was doing was little crosses. Again, if you like to stitch just straight cross stitch, that's fine. I'm not saying everybody should do what I do. They shouldn't. Why should you? You should do what you want to do. But I'm just saying that if speciality stitches freak you out, just give them a go, because you might find that it's something you love, and it might completely change your stitching, just like it did for me. So that's my 4th stitching milestone, the fact that I chose my own colours and I used all sorts of different speciality stitches. Number 4. So now we're on number 5. So I was quite happy then, stitching my chatelaines and all that type of thing. Anything that involved speciality stitches and speciality threads, I was there, I was stitching it. Through the cross stitch forum, I met a phenomenal stitcher, in my opinion, whose knowledge of fabric and threads is just amazing. And any of you that are on the cross stitch forum will have heard of and will know Mabel Figworthy, which is the name she goes by online. That's her little pseudonym online. But she is a fantastic designer and needleworker, specifically of hardanger. And this was sort of my next stitching milestone, really, because I always admired hardanger. I loved the simplicity of it, but the fact that it, is quite intricate. But you can probably guess the bit that freaked me out was the thought that I have to cut into my fabric, and the thought of it terrified me. That you can go wrong. You can't stick those fabric threads back. You can't really hide your mistakes if you cut in the wrong place. But Mabel was just so incredibly enthusiastic about hardanger that I thought I just have to give it a go. And I loved her designs, they were amazing, and I love the fact, obviously traditionally hardanger is white on white, but I love the fact that Mabel in her designs incorporated other sort of speciality pearl threads and different colours, and I just thought I have to give this a go. So anybody out there, well, I'll show you some of the designs of hers that I've stitched. Anybody out there who wants to have a go at hardanger, you feel it's something that you might like to try, I cannot recommend enough looking on Mabel Figworthy's website. I'll obviously link to it below this video. She has designs for the beginner, ranging right the way up to sort of more advanced hardanger. So where I started is there was a series of designs that she designed specifically for beginners, and it's a series of designs called Kaleidoscope, and you could stitch them 2 ways. So you could stitch them as no cut hardanger, so you stitched exactly the same design but no cutting. So I thought, great, this is where I will start. And that's what I did. So here are some of the designs in that series. So it basically got you into the habit of counting, using the 22 count hardanger fabric, and getting used to the satin stitches and the cloister blocks and other sorts of speciality stitches that you can do as well. So I'll just show you a few of them now. So there's that one. And these are all stitched using number 5 and number 8 pearl threads, and they were anchor variations pearls, I think. There's another one. So I really enjoyed doing these, and they stitch up quite quickly, considering those are little sheaf stitches there. So I thought, oh great, you know, I'm going to do hardanger now. So then I restitched the designs, these same designs, but this time I had to do the cutting, because I thought, you know, I've been chickening out of this for too long. So even though it freaked me out and scared me to death, I was going to overcome my fear of cutting, which I did, although I will admit that I stitched the designs and probably sat there for 20 minutes staring at my fabric, rereading the instructions 100 times and just going through it in my mind before I actually took the first snip. But, you know, I did it, and here is the proof. I don't know if you can see, but that's the no cut version, and here's the cut version. So these little blocks here, that's a little dove's eye, which is my hardanger nemesis, but we'll get to that. Is what I call a looped stitch. I hate looped stitches. So yeah, those are my first sort of cuttings, and I did get past my fear, and I'm really glad I did. I haven't done any hardanger for ages, and I really should. There's just too many things that I want to stitch. So from those sort of simpler designs, I went on to still simple designs. For any of you that do hardanger out there, these are probably really simple to you, but I bought quite a few of Mabel's patterns, and she has a really lovely Around the World series, and I love the fact that in each of her designs she obviously incorporates lots of different filling stitches, but also other speciality threads, stitches, and so you learn an awful lot just from a tiny pattern, and her instructions and how she feels about hardanger really come through. She's really passionate about it, and she's done a fantastic job in, you know, spreading the word of hardanger to other stitchers that would like to do it. So this is another one of her designs, again contain the evil dove's eye, but yeah, that's just to give you, you know, give you an idea. I think these are all stitched using Karen Wildflowers threads. I'll show you, although I'll do a video on threads, I'll just show you them quickly just so you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, so I carried on, you know, here's some more sort of hardanger, and they do stitch up quite quickly actually. They're really good. These little small designs are really good for things like cards or coasters, things like that. Last year, I think it was last year, Mabel also did for the whole year, she did a stitch along, Songs of the Weather stitch along. So each month there was a new little pattern containing a new different, you know, filling stitch or a new speciality stitch. I only got up to the first two. I don't know why. Obviously life took over, or for some reason probably there was something that freaked me out in one of the patterns, and I thought, oh, I can't do that. So I really should revisit them. But this was the first block that she did, and this was January's. I don't know if it's up on her website actually, but definitely if you think that hardanger is something you're interested in, you know, go and have a look on her website at her patterns, because they're awesome. Just quickly, in case you don't know, if you're a new stitcher, you don't know about pearl threads, they're obviously thicker than DMC, and this is what they look like. So these are number 5 pearls. So if you've ever seen these in a needlework shop and thought, oh my goodness, what do you do with those? They're way too thick. Well, hardanger is one of the things you can do with them. These are just some variations, obviously. The same numbers that the standard threads, the 6-stranded cotton comes in, correlate to the same numbers in the pearl. So they come, well, you can get number 3 pearls, which are really thick. But usually the ones that you use for hardanger, they sort of come in pairs. So if you use, like for this one, this is stitched on 25 count Lugano, which is my preference for hardanger. So for that one I would use a number 5 pearl for my cloister blocks and my satin stitches, which are those, and the cloister blocks are those sort of blocks of 5 threads. And for the filling stitches and the coloured bits in that pattern, they would have been the equivalent to a number 8 pearl. And again, perhaps I have done hardanger on somewhere on 28 count fabric, which I can't find. Here it is. So this is done on 28 count fabric. This was February's Songs of the Weather stitch along. You can't see their dove's eyes that way, can you? Evil dove's eyes, yeah. So that was stitched on 28 count Brittany, and for those I used number 8 pearl for the cloister blocks and number 12 pearl for the filling stitches, and yeah, so the dove's eyes in those little squares would have been done in number 12 pearl. But anyway, I am absolutely, totally no expert on hardanger, so that's just what I do. And then of course you can get your fancy threads, which of course I love, and Karen, the company Karen, they do, as well as doing water lilies, they do watercolours and wildflowers threads. So wildflower is the equivalent to number 8 pearl-ish, and the watercolours are equivalent to number 5 pearl. And the great thing and interesting thing about Karen threads is that all their colours, so you can get watercolours and wildflowers and water lilies, which is the silks that are often used in mirabilias, in chatelaines, they all come in the same colours, and sometimes it's quite interesting to see how the silk takes the dye completely differently to the cotton. But anyway, I'll talk more about threads in a thread video, but I thought for the sake of it I'll just show you, pearl threads. That's what I use for hardanger. So that is my number 5 in my stitching journey, was actually cutting into my fabric, which to be honest I do still find slightly scary at the thought that it could actually all unravel. But anyway, and it's also reminded me that I really should do some more hardanger, so that's a good thing. Last but not least in my stitching journey, number 6, it's sort of kind of linked to hardanger really. It's something that I wanted to do, and that was drawn thread work. Again, it completely freaked me out because of the need to cut into your fabric, but I found a really pretty design that I loved, and I thought, I really should get over it and give it a go. So this is the design that I did that involved drawn thread work. It's a design by Loopy Lou is a designer. I actually found it in a German PDF stitching magazine, but you can actually buy this one on So and So now. The designer's released it. So you can see the drawn thread work that I did. So right in the centre you've got hem stitch, and then that, that border there is 4-sided stitch, and then on the outside you've got the interlace stitch. And all of that is stitched in this design. The colours are Dinky Dye silks, and there's also some little purple delica beads. And then to do the hem stitch and the interlace stitch, you use a number 12 white pearl thread. And again, I was terrified of doing the drawn thread, but once I did it, I absolutely loved it. And again, it's something that I really should do more of, because I really enjoyed it, and I was so glad that I plucked up the courage to do it. So there you go. Another long video from me on my stitching journey. I would really love to hear, as I said, if any of you have also had those same sort of moments where you thought, I'm so glad that I plucked up the courage to do this. We all have different moments like that really. Or perhaps, if one of the things that I've mentioned is something you're looking to do next and you want more information or whatever, I'd really love to hear whatever you have to say on the subject, 'cause I'm always interested in, how other stitchers stitch and the things that they choose to do. I don't know what's next on my stitching journey really. I think I've kind of really found my little niche with the speciality stitches and all these sort of elements. As long as something, whether it's drawn thread or speciality stitches, there's always going to be some sort of those elements in the majority of what I stitch, apart from Heaven and Earth designs. Everything else really kind of revolves around the need I have to do something a bit different. So perhaps, maybe this has inspired you to think, oh, I quite fancy doing that, or whatever. But anyway, that's my stitching journey. So thank you for sitting through another one of my long videos. If indeed you have reached the end, congratulations. Thank you to all my subscribers. I'm, still always overwhelmed about people still keep subscribing to my channel. I think, I don't know what I'm on now, about 270 subscribers or something. So maybe, as I've missed, sort of 100 and 200 milestones, when we get to sort of over 300 subscribers, I was thinking I should do some sort of giveaway really as a thank you to everybody. So that's something to bear in mind if I get some more subscribers. So I will try and remember to do that if I get over 300. So yeah, that's my video for today. I hope you found it interesting. So all that's left for me to say is thanks for watching and happy stitching. Well, I realised that I didn't show you the designs that freaked me out that I mentioned at the beginning of my video. So in the interest of full disclosure, here are the designs that freaked me out. And then maybe by me showing these to you, it will make me actually stitch them, because I would have admitted it and put it out there into the universe that I really should get on and stitch these designs. So the 4 designs, I think they might actually be out of print now. I don't know for sure, but if they're not out of print, they're probably hard to find. But they're 4 designs by the Victorious Sampler, and they're in a series called the 4 Elements series. So I'll show them to you now, and you'll probably look at them and think, I don't know why they're freaking her out, but there you go, that's just me. So this is the first one. This one is the Green Earth Sampler. And the next one is Fresh Air Sampler. And this one is Crystal Waters. So they're all really, pretty. You can probably see by looking at them why I like them. And this one is actually kitted up, ready to go. I was going to stitch it and then I freaked out again and put it back. This is Crimson Fire. Now, I'm pretty sure I know the reason why these freak me out, especially this one, because it has the evil dove's eye stitch in it. I don't know what it is about dove's eyes. All I know is it took me quite a while to get them right, which is probably why in my mind every time I see one I think, oh my goodness, it's got a dove's eye in it. I hate those stitches. I don't really hate them, I just need more practice at them. So maybe I should make some sort of pact with you that I will stitch this design by the end of the year. Maybe now I've said that, I'll actually have to sit and do it and just suck it up and stitch the dove's eyes. Because to be honest, there isn't anything in that design that I can't do. I think probably each of those elements I have done in a design somewhere along the line, but I've never actually done all of them in one design, and that's probably what freaks me out. So okay, I promise that I will stitch this design by the end of the year. And maybe there's some of you out there that have a design, any design, that you have in your stash that's been freaking you out. And maybe you can join me in a little pact to do those designs that we're too scared to do, so I can have a little bit of encouragement and support from all of you. I can't believe I've just said that now, I'm going to really have to do it. Yeah, so I promise to stitch this design by the end of the year. I have the little, thread pack. I've got the pearls and I've got my fabrics. And my fabric's all ready to go, all cut, the edge has been marked out, ready for my first stitch. But it's freaked me out. But there we go. That's that. I will stitch that design by the end of the year, I promise.